invitation song, Where Can I Go, is not in the songbook either, but that'll be our song after the lesson. But if you do want to turn to number 626, Stand Up for Jesus, will be a song from the song before the lesson. So 626 is what we'll sing. Let's stand for the song. Stand up for Jesus, ye soldiers of the cross. Lift high His royal banner, it must not suffer loss. From victory unto victory, His army shall He lead, till every foe is vanquished, for Christ is Lord indeed. Stand up for Jesus, the trumpet call obey, forth to the mighty conflict, in this His glorious day. Ye that are men now serve Him, against unnumbered foes. Let courage rise with danger, and strength to strength oppose. Stand up for Jesus, stand in His strength alone. The arm of flesh will fail you, ye dare not trust your own. Put on the gospel armor, and watching unto prayer, where duty calls or danger, be never wanting there. Stand up for Jesus, the strife will not be long. This day the noise of battle, the next the victor's song. To Him that overcometh, a crown of life shall be. He with the King of glory shall reign eternally. Please be seated.
Good morning. What is the first thing that comes to your mind when you think about envy? The very first thing that comes to your mind might be jealousy. It might be the green-eyed monster. Some have said they're green with envy. We might think of deceit or evil intent when you think about this topic. But it is one of those things that is sinful. It's mentioned in a list of different sins throughout the New Testament. And you see these types of sins well up into our hearts sometimes when we're least expecting it. These things can kind of creep up on us. And it's one of those things you don't ever really hear somebody, come forward and ask forgiveness for. It's kind of like covetousness. I don't think I've ever heard anybody say, I need to be, forgiven for my covetousness. Envy is kind of one of those things. It's one of those things that's personal in our hearts, and it's something we have to be able to internalize, look at, identify. Surely we've all struggled with it at one time or another. I know I've had my bouts with it. And if you're honest, you probably can see it if it's in your life. as we go through this lesson. Envy is not jealousy. It's a little bit different, but usually where you find one, you typically find the other. They're kind of evil cousins, you might say. Jealousy fears losing what it already has. Envy is pained to see somebody else to have what they have. You're not happy for them because they have something. You're not joyful for them at all. I think there's a lot of envy around Christmas time, and I've preached sermons at Christmas time about covetousness, greed, giving, gifts. I've preached about the actual facts about Jesus' birth. I've preached about a lot of that stuff. I've really never preached a sermon on envy at Christmas time. And I don't really care to just follow the tradition of making sure you preach a Christmas sermon at Christmas time, but just to be honest, I've never preached a sermon about envy at Christmas time, but it does fit. I remember back when I was younger, my brother and I, it was just my younger brother, he was a year and a half younger than me, and of course still is, but when we were younger, my parents tried to be fair. They always tried to be even and spend the same amount of money on us and get us, things that were pretty comparable in price and so forth. But there were times when one gift was a little bit more expensive or just seemed to be better. And I remember him opening presents at times and looking over, and I wasn't really satisfied with my gift anymore because I saw his gift and I thought, well, I like that better. And so I was envious about it. And it didn't help any once we went outside to play with our presents, whatever they were, because then the neighbor kids would come, and both their parents worked. When only my dad worked, my mom was stay at home. But both their parents worked, so they had, even more money, and they had better presents than we had. And so we were envious even more, And so there's the temptation to be envious when somebody gets something good and you don't. When somebody else is blessed more than you. Well, what is it? Let's just talk about what is envy. I don't know what I just did. I think I accidentally turned it off, Jackson. Thank you. What exactly is envy? Well, it's being discontent at the excellence or good fortune of another. It's to resent or hate their success or their good fortune. Somebody else is blessed. Somebody else is having success. Somebody else is having something good going. They're excited about it. They're joyful about it. They're like, man, I'm so excited. This is great. But you're not happy for them. You're not excited because of their good fortune. You're upset about their good fortune. You're not having a good time. You begrudge it. The Bible often brings out the fact that envy is the idea about malice or spite. You begin to wish evil for that person. You kind of wish that, that thing they have might just be taken from them, or they might lose it, or something like that. It has an agenda. It's like having a resentment toward another person because of some good thing they've accomplished or some blessing they've received. And so an envious person wants to see that good fortune taken from them and given to themselves. It's very selfish. It's jealousy's evil cousin. Let's say you find out a brother or sister just inherited $1 million. Maybe they had a relative that died and left them $1 million, and you just heard about them getting $1 million. Maybe they were excited to get it. They didn't expect to get it. They didn't know they were going to get that, but they got it, and they were excited, so they shared the news with you. And you're like, oh, wow, that's great. But later on, you went off and thought about that. And all you could think was, oh, they must think they're better than everybody now because they got something good, and they wanted to share that exciting news with me. And so you start hating that person because of the good news that they got about the blessing that they had. And the envy in your heart starts to create something evil inside of you. And it's a sin that if we don't repent of, it will cost us our souls. The Bible's clear about that. You don't get to enter the kingdom of heaven with envy in your heart. And so we think about, how do I feel when I see somebody with success? Imagine you're content with your circumstances. You drive a 2013 pickup truck. I have a 2013 pickup truck. And let's say your neighbor pulls up with a 2024, brand new, bells and whistles, just came off the showroom floor, and he's got this brand new pickup. And you were just perfectly content with your 13 pickup truck, but now you can't help, and your neighbor gets out of that thing and he waves with a great big smile. Hey, neighbor, how you doing? He's happy to see you. He doesn't think he's better than you. He's just glad you're his neighbor. But you think, man, that guy must think he's better than everybody. He's so excited about that pickup truck, man, he thinks his stuff don't stink. And so you just start hating the guy because he has some blessing in his life or some fortune that came to him, whatever it is. And that's like envy. It's envious of what the goodness of others is enjoying, and you just can't stand it. And if you look at it with the Bible, turn with me to Genesis chapter 26. Let's look at some biblical examples of this. Back in Genesis 26. And this was within the life of Isaac. You remember God was leading and guiding Isaac. In Genesis 26, beginning in verse 1, besides the famine that occurred in the days of Abraham. So Isaac went to Gerar, to Abimelech, king of the Philistines. The Lord appeared to him and said, "Do not go down to Egypt. Stay in the land of which I shall tell you. Sojourn, bless you, for to you and to your descendants I will give all these lands, and I will establish the oath of Father Abraham. By your descendants of heaven, I will give your descendants all these lands, and by your descendants all the nations of the earth shall be blessed." To my laws. So Isaac lived in Gerar. God said, "Listen, I'm here. I'm going to bless you. Everything's going to go well for you. And by the way, in the future, you're going to own all these lands anyway. Your descendants will all of this, according to my promise to your father." And so Isaac lives in Gerar. Drop down to verse 12. Now Isaac sowed in that land and reaped in the same year 100-fold. Wow, he was really being blessed by God. Look at the great blessings God was giving to this man. And the Lord blessed him, and the man became rich and continued to grow richer until he became very wealthy. For he had possessions of flocks and herds. It talks about the stuff he owns. He owns this, he owns that, and a great household, so that the Philistines envied him. You see that? The people he was living in the land with, they didn't really have a problem with him until he started getting richer. And once he started having more stuff and he had more blessings, they just couldn't stand it. They were looking over there at all his blessings and all the things that he had, and they didn't like it. They were envious of him having that. They didn't want him to have that. They were not happy for him, although he was very happy to live there. He had no problem with them. He was glad to live there. He was glad to see them, but they weren't happy for him. They had the problem. Isaac didn't have a problem. He was happy to be blessed by God and happy to be living in the land. And so they eventually drove him away from them. Verse 16, Abimelech said to Isaac, "Go away from us, for you are too powerful for us." So Isaac departed, and they camped in the valley of Gerar and settled there. So he goes outside of town and lives there. But you see the division that it causes? There was envy, and so no longer did they have this relationship. No longer was there unity with them anymore. And it's because of wealth. Do people get envious today because of other people's money? Somebody else has more money, somebody else has more stuff, and so we become envious. It's a temptation, isn't it? Listen, brethren, it doesn't matter how much money you have or don't have. If you want to really find out, you might think you're poor. You're not poor. Come with me to Tanzania. I'll show you poor. They live in mud huts, some of them, and they just cook on a campfire. They have one pot and one pan. You're not poor. Believe me, if you live in a house and you have food to eat and clothes to wear, you have more than you think you do. You're not poor. But the reality is, wherever you're at on the economic scale, there's always you. And so there's always an ability to look up and see. It doesn't matter if you have $20,000 in the bank. There's somebody with a $200,000. And if you have $200,000 in the bank, there's somebody with $2 million in the bank. And if you've got $2 million, there's somebody with $1 billion. And a billionaire can look up and see the guy with $10 billion. And he sees the guy with $100 billion. And he looks at $32 billion. And you're a little higher than you, wherever you are on the ladder. So it doesn't matter where you're at with stuff and with somebody else's success that you don't have. Envy is something you have to choose you're not going to be a part of. You're going to put that to death in your heart and be content with what you have and be joyful for the success and good fortune of others. It is one of those sins that sort of creep up. Look at Genesis 29. Genesis chapter 29, beginning in verse 31. Now the Lord saw that Leah, remember Leah and Rachel were the wives of Jacob. He loved Rachel. He ended up with Leah. Verse 31, now the Lord saw that Leah was unloved, and he opened her womb, but Rachel was barren. Now remember, the Lord is opening wombs here. So Leah is going to bear. She conceived and bore a son and named him Reuben, for she said, because the Lord has seen my affliction, surely now my husband will love me. Then she conceived again and bore a son, and said, Because the Lord has heard that I am unloved, he has therefore given me this son also. So she named him Simeon. She conceived again. My husband will become attached to me, because I have borne him 3 sons. Therefore he was named Levi. And she conceived again. Praise the Lord. Then she stopped bearing. Now, you have Leah bearing all of these kids. She's got 4 boys running around. And, every year there's another one. And it's just like kids are just running around. Rachel having children. Look at the next verse, verse 1. Now when Rachel saw that she bore Jacob no children, she became jealous of her sister, and she said to Jacob, Give me children or else I die. This is the idea of being envious. Envious of what somebody else has. Her sister has all these kids running around, and that was a big thing back then. She wanted to be able to anything else. It was what procreation. That was their purpose. She wasn't bearing any children, and every year she turns around and Leah's having another one. And these kids are running around Leah, and she's got all these boys, and she's standing there with no kids. And you can imagine the temptation brewing inside of her to be envious of her sister. Not her sister, her the other wife. And so she's envious because of this. Do people get envious because of people's children? Maybe not because of how many they have. But they do. People are envious because of children. That guy's son made the team. My kid was cut from the team. So I'm envious. That guy's child is getting straight A's in school. My child isn't getting straight A's in school. Or their child is, popular, and their child gets this, and my child doesn't. And there's always a temptation to be envious about that. And sometimes among kids, children, and even among adults, people are envious because of people's looks. You don't have any control over that. You were born looking a certain way. But based on society's, depiction of what is really good looking, somebody is born and they have good looks, and so you have other children or other people who don't like them just because they're good looking. And they don't feel like they're as good looking. So they hate the person because they're good looking. Think they're better than everybody. And that's sad. They didn't have any control over how they were going to look. Let's look at the nature of envy. We can see what envy is, but look at the nature of envy. Turn with me over to James chapter 3. And there's a contrast here between from above that comes from God and is godlike, and wisdom from below, which is like God. And you see this in James 3, verse 14 through 16. He says, If you have bitter jealousy and selfish ambition in your heart, do not be arrogant and so lie against the truth. The lie would be claiming to be wise and understanding, claiming to be a faithful child of God, and the truth is revealed in the fact that there's envy, and so they're not what they're claiming to be. They're not a faithful child of God. He says, This wisdom is not that which comes down from above, but is earthly, natural, demonic. You didn't think about somebody who's envious as being a demonic person, but that's the idea. It's the nature of demons, essentially. It's demonic. For where jealousy and selfish ambition exist, you find disorder and every evil thing. And so when you have this going on, there's going to be disorder and every evil thing. You don't want to have this in your heart. Proverbs 24:7, Solomon said, Wrath is fierce and anger is a flood. Wrath and anger are bad, but who can stand before jealousy? Or envy, some translations have. He says envy is worse than wrath and anger. Can you imagine? It's worse. Some people in the church become envious of those in the world. Psalm 73, classic example. The psalmist looked at those who were prosperous in the world and he almost stumbled until he went to the house of the Lord and he realized what their end is going to be in all of their pursuits and all of their wealth and all of their might. Their end is not going to be favorable in the judgment. And so he was able to control the temptation to envy them. And so it leaves your victims miserable and unhappy, envy does. You'll never be satisfied if you're envious. You're not happy, not truly. Look over with me at Luke chapter 15. You remember the parable we refer to as the prodigal son, the parable of the prodigal? That young son, he asked the father for the portion of his inheritance that fell to him, and so he took that money and he went to a distant country and he started to spend it. And he spent it on sinful living. You remember? Sinful living was what he did, and then eventually he got down to the bottom of the barrel, ran out of luck, I guess, the famine in the land, he was feeding the pigs. He got to the point where he said, and I'm just going to repent. I'm going to confess to my father that I've been foolish and I'm sorry. And he did just that. He came back home, the father saw him coming, ran out there, gave him a hug and a kiss. I've sinned. And the father called the servants. He says, bring the ring, bring the sandals, bring the robe, and put it on him. And then kill the fattened calf and let's celebrate. I want you to look with me at verse 25. They were going to be celebrating in the house, great feast. And so they're celebrating and everybody's all joyful and rejoicing at his return. Verse 25 says, now his older son was in the field. And when he came and approached the house, he heard music and dancing. And he summoned one of the servants and began inquiring what these things could be. And he said to him, your brother has come, and your father has killed the fattened calf because he received him back safe and sound. But he became angry and was not willing to go in. And his father came out and began pleading with him. But he answered and said to his father, look, for so many years I have been serving you, and I have never neglected a command of yours, and yet you have never given me a young goat so that I might celebrate with my friends. But when this son of yours came who devoured your wealth with prostitutes, you killed the fattened calf for him. You see what happened? The older brother, he hears that the younger brother is being celebrated. They're having a great time. There's free food. Come on in and enjoy the free food meal. Get any free food. I'm not involved in this celebration because I'm having a problem here. And the problem is all about me. The problem is because I want something that I want and I'm not getting it, and I'm not happy that they're having such a good time with their fortune in coming back to the Father. And so he won't even go to the house. He won't even go in the house. He stays outside the house while everybody else goes in and enjoys the meal. Do you see what's going on here? He has a heart problem. And he was stubborn about it. And that's a picture of the Jews. They wouldn't accept those Gentiles that were being invited into the kingdom, or even those sinful Jews that before the Gentiles were being talked to by Jesus to repent, and Jesus was accepting them, tax collectors, prostitutes, and sinners. And they couldn't get over it. They could not celebrate the fact that they were being saved. Proverbs 14:30, Solomon said, a tranquil heart is life to the body, but envy rots the bones. Envy is bad stuff. It's poisonous to our bones. Let's look at another point here, the company that envy keeps. 1 Peter 2:1 says, therefore, putting aside all malice and all deceit and hypocrisy and envy and all slander. Envy keeps company with things like slander, hypocrisy, deceit, malice, all of these things. Titus chapter 3 and verse 3, for we also once were foolish ourselves, disobedient, deceived, enslaved to various lusts and pleasures. Now listen to this. Paul says this is how we all once spent our life. Paul was in. What was my life characterized by? He says it was characterized spending it in malice, envy, hateful, and hate. Listen, when you envy somebody, you start hating them. You start hating that person. They might not even know that you hate them. They don't even know what they did wrong. They were blessed. They had some good fortune. They got excited about it, wanted to share their good news with you. And now all of a sudden you hate them for it? They didn't know that. Why would you hate them? That's what happens with envy. And you just can't stand them anymore because of how blessed they are. Look at Galatians 5:19 through 20. Galatians chapter 5, 19 and 20. Now the deeds of the flesh are evident, which are immorality, impurity, sensuality, idolatry, sorcery, enmities, strife, jealousy, outbursts of anger, disputes, dissensions, factions, envying, drunkenness, carousing, and things like these. Do you see the company that is kept with envy? Stuff. These are deeds of the flesh. These are people who cannot inherit the kingdom of heaven. If I have a problem with envy in my heart, I need to be identifying that and repenting of that. I have to. I don't want to miss heaven and sit around and hate because of their good fortune. That is not a way to live as a Christian. 2 Corinthians 12:20, I'm afraid that perhaps when I come, I may find you to be not what I wish, and may be found by you to be not what you wish. In other words, Paul says, when I come over to see you guys at Corinth, I'm afraid that when I get there, I'm not going to find Christian living, which is what I wish I find. I'm afraid that when I get there, I'm going to see practice. And then I'm afraid that you're going to find not what you want. You're not going to see me giving you encouragement and commending you and building you up, but I'm going to have to come in there and rebuke. He says, I'm afraid that when I get there that I might find strife, jealousy, angry tempers, disputes, slanders, gossip, arrogance, disturbances. That's what Paul's afraid he might find when he gets there. I think you get the point. There are many passages we could look at where envy sits in a grouping of all kinds of terrible things that we don't want to be associated with as Christians. And we're fighting the flesh daily to make sure these things don't get the upper hand in our life. We're staying focused and trying to take inventory of our lives, weed out these things, work on these things, not allow them to take over our heart and control us. Think about the damage that envy has caused. You just look back. You remember Cain and Abel? You know what 1 John 3:12, it says, Cain, who was of the evil one, slew his brother. And for what reason did he slay him? Because his deeds were evil and his brother's deeds were righteous. Do people get envious because there are other people in the church who are like good deed doers? I mean, they just love doing good deeds for people. They always want to obey God. They're constantly searching the scriptures to find out how they can amend their life and become more like Christ. They're careful about the smallest things, and sometimes that irritates us if we just kind of fly by the seat of our pants, doesn't it? I just kind of wing it, and I just kind of fly through my Christianity. Pretty much I do this to that. But then you've got those brothers that are like, well, actually it says right here, we're not supposed to be doing this technically. And it's like, well, you know what? Okay, Mr. Goody Two-Shoes. I mean, you can get that way towards somebody. You can. And you can start feeling like, well, who does this guy think he is? You know, he wants to keep every single letter of the law. I mean, come on, what is this? But he's diligent. He's serious. He's adamant about how he wants to follow God, or she is. And so we should be rejoicing about that. They're trying to bring us closer to God, not further away. They're trying to encourage us about things, not discourage us. But it can be discouraging if my deeds aren't quite up to snuff. And they're really trying to live honestly and seriously for God. If I'm not, I can become upset with my brother instead of rejoicing about that. And we don't slay each other physically today, but we slay each other. We do it with our tongues. And we speak and say that good for nothing. And so we beat them down verbally, and we say things about them. God favored Abel, but he didn't favor Cain or Cain's sacrifice, and Cain couldn't stand it. He hated Abel, and so he killed him. Remember what envy caused to happen to Joseph. Joseph and his brothers, you remember Joseph's brothers, they wanted to kill him. They hated him because father gave him a coat of many colors. He was having these dreams that people were bowing down to him. He didn't know where the dreams, why he was getting those dreams. I mean, I'm assuming he knew God was giving him the dreams, but why me? Why did I get these dreams and not you? I don't know. God chose me. And so he shared the dreams. Maybe he was excited about those dreams, but his brothers weren't excited about the dreams. Who do you think you are? You think you're greater than us? You think you're better than us? Man, you need to humble yourself, Joseph, buddy. You're walking around with your coat on like your stuff is not like anybody else's. Father gave it to me. I like the coat. Why can't I wear it? I'm excited about it. But they weren't happy. Prevailed, and they ended up selling him to a group of Midianite traders headed for Egypt. You know the story. He was enslaved. He ended up in prison, and eventually he was elevated up by God to second in command. 1 Samuel 18, 7 through 9 says, the women sang as they played and said, Saul has slain his thousands, and David his 10,000s. Then Saul became very angry, for this saying displeased him, and he said, they have ascribed to David 10,000s, but to me they have ascribed only thousands. What more can he have but the kingdom? Saul looked at David with suspicion from that day on, because people were saying better things about David than they were about Saul. And Saul was king. He's like, how dare anybody speak highly of somebody in the kingdom more than me? I've been out there on the battlefield, but David had slain 10,000s. Do we sometimes get envious of one another because of the praise and the accolades that others get that maybe we don't get? Or maybe you did a job, but somebody else did a job, and then they did more than that. And so they're getting praise for this and that. And you're thinking, well, how come I didn't even get any recognition? Or I only did my stuff. You don't like that they did more than you. Or in some people's minds, they did better than you. And so you become suspicious of them. And if it, what it led to, Saul, he chased him all over the countryside for years because of how bad it hurt his pride and his ego. The Lord was crucified because of envy. Mark 15:10, he was aware that the chief priests handed him over because of envy. You know what they were envious about? His success, his popularity with the people, the crowd that flocked to him everywhere he went. They said, eventually the whole world will be following him. They couldn't stand the fact that the people loved him so much. They loved the fact that Jesus was healing them, Jesus was teaching them, Jesus cared about them, Jesus wanted to go to their villages and their towns and try to find out. He was constantly out and about among the people, helping them, blessing them, and the Pharisees could not stand it. They were envious. Paul's persecutions from the Jews, where do you think it came from? It came from envy. Acts 13:45, when the Jews saw the crowds, they were filled with jealousy. Or the King James says envy, and began contradicting the things spoken by Paul and were blaspheming. Envy will cause division. Envy will cause people to separate. Paul's fine. Paul's in the synagogue. Paul's teaching. This is wonderful. Wait a minute. Everybody's flocking to Paul. This can't be happening. We are not going to sit by while Paul has all this success and we don't have any. Paul's taking our success away, and so they envied him and they run him out of town. That's how it happens. You see envy at work. It's at work in the church. The one-talent man can become envious of the five-talent. One brother gets recognition for a job that he does. I didn't get recognition for the job that I did. Do you know I did better job than he did? I did more work than he did. How come he's getting all the recognition and I'm not getting any recognition? And envy can well up inside. If somebody gets to be appointed over a certain task, maybe the elders say, hey, we want you to be looking over this. Well, why is he getting that task? How come I didn't get that task? I'm more qualified for that task. Don't you know my background? I'm just speaking generally. I don't think that will happen here, but this is how it works oftentimes in churches, brethren. It does happen. The blessing of somebody's success, good fortune, all of that. It happens among preachers, doesn't it? One preacher hears about another preacher across town and the success he's having. Oh, he's baptizing people. Man, did you hear about their record attendance the other day? Oh, man, that preacher, he's got a YouTube channel and he's preaching to so many people. Did you know how many people are watching his blog? Oh, reading his stuff and watching his stuff. Man, how come they're all talking about what he's doing? Man, this guy or because of that guy. It can happen among elders. Think, well, the other elder, everybody goes to him with their problems. They're more comfortable talking to him. Or that elder, man, everybody likes his teaching more than mine. He's a really good teacher. Whatever it is, Elders can become envious of one another in a congregation. Does envy happen among entire churches? Congregations? Yeah, one congregation can be envious of another congregation in town, right? That congregation is growing. That congregation is involving themselves with other people. That congregation is doing this. And so what happens when I become envious? We're no longer going to participate with that congregation. I'm not going to the celebration. I'm not going to the singing. I'm not going to the meal or the gospel meeting or whatever it is that's going on because of envy. Envy is self-destructive. Let me give you two examples of this. You remember back in the Old Testament in the book of Esther when Haman built the gallows? You know why he built it? He was envious of Mordecai. And he was wanting Mordecai to hang on those gallows. So he built the gallows and started his manipulative deceitful plan of getting. What ended up happening? He hung. Isn't that how envy, isn't it? Remember Daniel. All the satraps and all those in the kingdom of Babylon, they were envious of Daniel. and his success and blessings by God. And they sought out to create a plan by which Daniel be thrown in the lion's den and be dead. Well, Daniel did get thrown in the lion's den, but God was with him, shut the mouths of the lions, and what ended up happening? Those satraps were the ones that were thrown in and eaten by those lions. And so envy sometimes bites us. And lastly, what is the remedy for envy? How do we remedy this problem? If I'm having a problem with envy because of somebody else's fortune, I'm not happy for them. Rejoice. Love is the answer. The Corinthian church had a lot of this going on. They were very fleshly minded. Paul deals with it. And Paul told them in 1 Corinthians 13:4, love is not jealous. Love is not going to be involved with envy over another's success. It's not going to do it. Where there's envy, there's a lack of love. You know, that's what you're at. That's what it is. If I want to overcome envy in my life, I have to grow in my love for others. And you remember Paul identified them in 1 Corinthians 3. He says, I wanted to write you, but he says, you're still fleshly. I can't, you're still fleshly. You're still infants in Christ. They were supposed to be growing. He says, you're jealousy in your midst. And that's the same thing that's demonic. Paul was identifying a demonic characteristic that was involved in their fleshly ways. In 1 Corinthians 12:26, he told them if one member suffers, all the members should suffer with it. If one member is honored, all the members rejoice with it. Romans 12:15, he told them, rejoice with those who rejoice, mourn with those who mourn. I'm supposed to be rejoicing when my brethren have something to rejoice about. If you're having more children or grandchildren, that's a cause for rejoicing. I'm joyful for you. I'm thankful you're having those grandchildren, those great-grandchildren, or those children. Did you get more money, or did you get an inheritance, or did you get something? Blessing? Man, I'm joyful for you. Did you get a new truck? Man, I'm so joyful for you. Let's go check it out. Wow, this is great. This will be great for you. I'm so happy for you. I should be rejoicing about those things. I shouldn't be casting an envious eye and start hating that brother or sister because of it. Another thing is being content. Typically, it's because I'm not really content with my circumstances. I'm not happy with mine. Or maybe you were content until you heard about somebody else's fortune. And if, media doesn't help any, I think media is constantly bombarding us with people who are living lavishly, or they're going on vacation, or they've got some exotic experience happening, and you're just looking at that going, wow. And then you go back to your normal everyday life, and you're thinking, well, this isn't very fabulous as theirs. This isn't as exotic as what I've been staring at on Instagram all day, scrolling, for hours and hours, everybody's fabulous lifestyle. Mine isn't that great. And so I'm not content, I'm not happy, I'm not satisfied. And anybody who has anything more than me, well, I just hate them for it. It's terrible. You have to crucify self, because it really goes back to that, doesn't it? Pride, selfishness, I want more for me. And if you're doing better than me, I'm not happy because it's not me. And so I end up hating people because of their success. And lastly, I would say we need to pray about it. You need to go to God. You need to ask God to help you overcome it. You need to pray that you can have joy when you find out about somebody's success, that you can truly rejoice with them, and you can be there for them in that moment. So, can we overcome envy? Yes, we can overcome it. We need to get into the Word. I would say this, if you're neglecting Bible study opportunities, if you've got opportunities to be studying the Bible and you're deciding, I think I'll pass on that Bible opportunity, you're probably not doing much to be able to help overcome envy if you've got it in your life. You need to be involved in more Bible study, not less. Because what will happen is less time in the Word and less time in prayer, you're going to slowly but surely start drifting further and further, and more than envy is going to be in your heart. And it's going to become more corrupt, and you'll be connecting yourself to something that is dark, and it will ruin your soul and cost you. So we need to keep His Word all the time in our hearts. We need to be praying all the more. We need to love one another. I'll tell you what, lastly, before we close, I had a problem with a brother in school of preaching. He seemed to love and always make jokes, and it just rubbed me the wrong way. And I struggled with it for weeks. It went on. Every time he came in, it got worse. And I started kind of not even wanting to see him. And I don't remember the lesson that was preached, but something hit me like a ton of bricks, convicted me about the way I was feeling toward this brother. And I humbled myself, and I started doing what the lesson suggested. It said, I want you to start praying for this individual. Pray for their success, pray for their health, pray for their family, pray for rich blessings, pray that God would take care of them, and don't stop. Just start praying this all the time. So I started practicing it. And at first it was a bit difficult praying for this individual. But you know what? The more I prayed for that brother, the more I loved that brother. I prayed for him every day. I started praying that his health would do better, that he was, and I got to the point where he'd come in and I'd say, how you doing, brother? I had no more animosity in my heart toward him because I couldn't stop praying for him. God, he's successful. I want him to be more successful. God, he's got great health. I hope you give him better health. God, he has more kids. I hope he gets even more kids. I hope you bless him more, God. God, help me to be joyful about all of his blessings. I'm thankful for this brother. I'm thankful for him. And you know what? It changed our relationship because I started hanging out with that guy. We had a great relationship. I'll never forget that. That's one of the things you should do is pray for that individual, whoever you have a problem with, and pray for them a lot. So let us continue to work on our lives. This is one of those things that we just need to remember because it can creep up on us. And we look at other people in the world and in the church, and it could be a lot of different reasons why we become envious. And so maybe you're struggling with this, or maybe you're struggling with something else and you need to confess it. We would love to help you with that. If you want to confess publicly this morning, our elders will pray on your behalf. God will forgive you. If you need to obey the gospel this morning, or you just like to ask for prayers from the church, let us know how we can help you by coming forward while we stand and while we sing.
Let me be low in this so simple world. Hardly a comfort can afford. Trying alone to face temptation sore. Where could I go but to the Lord? Where could I go? Where could I go? Seeking a refuge for my soul. Needing a friend to save me in the end. Where could I go but to the Lord? Neighbors are kind, I love them everyone. We get along in sweet accord. But when my soul needs manna from above, where could I go but to the Lord? Where could I go? Oh, where could I go? Seeking a refuge for my soul. Needing a friend to save me in the end. Where could I go but to the Lord? Life here is friend with friends I love so dear. Comfort I get from God's own word. Yet when I face the chilling hand of death, where could I go but to the Lord? Where could I go? Oh, where could I go? Seeking a refuge for my soul. Needing a friend to save me in the end. Where could I go but to the Lord?
Please be seated. To help prepare our minds for the Lord's Supper, let's turn and sing number 134.